Good day to you. And right away, I'd like you to pause this video, and check the label on your shirt, if you would, or your sweater or your sweatshirt. Check the label and see what country this thing that you're wearing was made in. Could you do that? All right, how about that? You have a shirt that's from China or Ecuador or India or Honduras or Mexico. Or maybe you have one, if you're a really rare person, from the United States. But wait a minute, maybe that shirt isn't even made in the United States or Mexico or China, even though the label says it. Maybe it's just assembled in that country. And actually the cotton for it comes from India or Pakistan. So the cotton's coming from one country, going to another country where the shirt is assembled and then distributed in a third country and perhaps even purchased in a fourth country. This, in a nutshell, is globalization, and you're living it every single day just by what you're wearing. But globalization happens in all facets of the production of things, including media. And that's what this chapter is on. It's on globalization. It's the chapter that precedes the rest of the book's structure, which is breaking down media systems into elements that we'll be getting into for the rest of the semester. But before we can do that, we want to talk about how media systems are operating within a certain context. And that context I'm calling in this chapter a context of globalization. So in this video lecture, we're going to cover several things having to do with how the world is coming together. And actually, let's define what globalization is, because that is essentially what it's about. It's how the world is coming closer together. It's how you in your daily routine will get on Facebook and you have friends in Ireland, for example. It's also how managers at companies are looking for products, and sometimes their stock is coming from, I have a friend here who has a local flower shop, and her stock sometimes comes from Holland when she orders tulips. How amazing is that? A little tiny flower shop in East Stroudsburg is selling tulips that were grown in Holland, all the way across the Atlantic Ocean in Europe. And so globalization is the world coming closer together, the world in terms of economies and governments, and all sorts of enterprises and levels of human communication where we're more aware of other countries. I mean, in the past, if I were to ask you where, for example, Iraq was, you may have a really hard time trying to find that on the map. But today you're at least aware of it, even if you don't know the big cities, like you probably know Baghdad, for example. But you may not know the other cities that are maybe second, third, fourth, and fifth in Iraq. Yet you still have an awareness of Iraq, and that's what globalization is doing. It's bringing us closer together. So let's talk about what's causing globalization. And if you've read the book, you know some of these things already, but we can certainly expand on them here. One of the things that's causing globalization is international travel. That is, people are able to book their own airplane flights today, and they're able to get great deals, and they're able to just take off. There are more airplane routes, and there are more ways to purchase airplane tickets, as well as car tickets and train tickets. Not so much trains in the U.S. If you live in Europe, you have a lot of options. And if you live in Mexico, you have a lot of options with buses. Here in the U.S., you have some, Greyhound, etc., but mostly it's airplane travel if you want to get away. And so international travel is fueling people going abroad. I was looking at my Facebook yesterday, and some friends went away to Ireland, and they were coming home. And another person was talking about getting away for spring break and going somewhere warm. That's the fact of life today. International travel is relatively easy. Whether you choose to do it or not is your own personal doing. The second factor that's fueling globalization is technology. We know that our handheld devices, our smartphones, our tablets, our laptops, even our television sets are tying us into other parts of the world. I was going through CNN not too long ago, and I came across a show I don't particularly care for, but I stayed on it. It was Anthony Bourdain's, I forget what it's called. It's basically a show where he travels around and highlights the cooking in a foreign location. So sometimes he'll go into the mountains and find a tribe that makes a pork roast a certain way. And I was just thinking about, how many little snippets of television are like that today, whether it's the show Survivor or whether it's one of these reality television programs showing two guys, as I was watching the other night, I don't even know the name of the show, who are purposefully stranded in the outbacks of Australia and they have to find their way through. We get little bits and pieces through technologies like television and our cell phones going on to Facebook and looking at photos. Technology is making the world more global as well. A third piece of the action here that's causing globalization is the global media conglomerate, which is actually the main reason that globalization is so accelerated right now, because it's mostly about profit making. And the global media conglomerate is a large corporation that used to be called a transnational corporation, but that no longer makes sense because the new kind of company doesn't really care. Well, I shouldn't say doesn't care. The new kind of company doesn't really mind what products it's selling. It's really about what the local demands are for a product. So a company like News Corporation, for example, a global media conglomerate, it has a newspaper here in the United States called the Wall Street Journal. It's a very old-fashioned, stodgy financial newspaper, very conservative. And yet this same company, News Corporation, owns a newspaper in London called The Sun, which right on page 3 every single day has a topless female. And it doesn't really matter that these are two opposite ideals, the Wall Street Journal and the Sun, at play in terms of the content. What matters is that the local population will support that content and purchase it and make money for the company. So global media conglomerates like News Corporation, Disney, one of them is a German corporation. That's going to be a little hint for you on the quiz, and you may not know it before you read the chapter. There's that company that's in play as well as a global media conglomerate, as well as Viacom, NBC Universal. There are others, Sony. These are monstrous corporations that have an extreme reach into your daily life in terms of the newspapers that you read, the magazines, the films that you go to see, the radio programs. Check out the book on this score. I don't want to go into too much detail. Check out some of the global media conglomerates and all the different properties they own in a table in Chapter 2. Moving now to the fourth and final thing that causes globalization, we've got audience curiosity. Audience curiosity is like coffee. When you first try it, you don't like it. It's too harsh, tastes bitter. But then you try it again, you get used to it, and then, before too long, you crave it maybe. If you're a coffee drinker, I'm not, but a lot of people are. And sometimes you can't even live without it. That's what audience curiosity is like in the realm of media and learning about the world. Is that, when you first watch a French film, it's like, what's going on here? I can't make out their accents. The body movements are strange. The plot is so different. And then you start to learn how to watch the French film because you see some common things in there. And so now you start to like it. And then maybe you start to desire it. That's how audience curiosity works, really in terms of anything new in life, but also in terms of media and therefore globalization. Now let's talk about how globalization, though, is not something that's necessarily good from the point of view of a lot of different people. I mean, yes, it makes a lot of money, but is it good? And there specifically are 3 criticisms of globalization, and mostly these criticisms are coming from academics like me, professors who study media and what media are doing to us, but also from citizen groups, advocacy groups, in some cases governments, and in more rare circumstances, media professionals criticizing their own craft. Criticism number 1 is that because of globalization, we have homogenization of media content. Homogenization, that means sameness in media content. When you homogenize milk, you're making it the same. It's not going to be susceptible to bacteria. Homogenization of content means in the radio world, for example, you can get in the car and you can go to Philadelphia and you can search for the top 40 station there, and you'll hear a lot of songs like Bruno Mars, for example, or Ariana Grande. And then you'll drive over to Delaware and you go through Wilmington, you'll get out of range of the Philly stations, and now you're hearing those same artists, plus Taylor Swift, for example. And so then you're driving down to Atlanta, Georgia. Now you're getting far out of the east and then eventually down to St. Petersburg, Florida, and you're picking up Bruno Mars and Taylor Swift. And you're saying, there's a lot of sameness out there. Well, that's the case not only for specific songs like in the radio world, but also for formulas for how shows are done. Just think of reality programs and how almost all of them start out with a cast of contestants who one by one are eliminated. There's drama created. There's usually certain stereotype characters on there, like the beautiful woman or the strong guy or the Latino. I'm mentioning stereotypes that actually exist in the way that people are cast in reality television programs, because there's a formula there, a sameness, because corporations, they don't want to take risks. When they roll out products, they want to roll out products, including TV shows, magazines, etc., that already have a track record of success. So homogenization is a very big criticism. And, in a lot of ways, that's one thing this course, I think, will do for you. It will show you what else is out there in terms of media content. And then you'll start to see, if you don't already, how much sameness there is within the United States media selection that you have, just by virtue of it being produced within one particular country. Now, that's not the only criticism, however, of media. We also have the criticism of unfairness in global information flow. Unfairness in global information flow. I know two of you in this class have some foreign heritage backgrounds. One of you has heritage in the Dominican Republic. You can go back and watch the video introductions to find out who that is if you want. And another one of you has a heritage from Lebanon in the Middle East. And so I wonder what you think about how those two countries are portrayed whenever you hear them in U.S. media. For example, is Lebanon only ever mentioned when there's a problem, specifically a civil war, or a bomb that's gone off, or poverty? Similarly for the Dominican Republic, is there a disease outbreak? Do you even hear about the Dominican Republic? I'm asking these questions to show us what there is in terms of information flow from these two tiny countries, because that's what this criticism is all about, that when you look at information flow around the world through media, through TV content, through internet content, through newspapers, through radio, etc., when you just look at that circle of information going around the world, do you really have an evenness to it? Is the same amount of information that goes out of the United States, for example, through its movies that are shown in small towns around the world, is that the same amount of information being matched by information coming in from Britain or France or Venezuela or Cuba? Or is there an unevenness? Like when you talk to a friend and they talk about themselves all the time and they talk a lot, and they talk with great force and great volume, and you find a hard time getting a word in, is there an unevenness in the information flow? Well, there is, according to a lot of countries. And not only is there an unevenness, but some countries feel that what information is flowing from their country into other countries is not representative of their countries. A classic case is Mexico. I go to Mexico twice a year. I actually have a house down there. My wife and I have remortgaged our house here, and we bought a house there that we have an eye on for being our retirement house. And we spend a lot of time there with our kids. We want to expose them to the Mexican culture. And I just have to say I love Mexico and I love Mexican people. And yet, if you ask the average American citizen who hasn't been there about Mexico, oh, don't drink the water. Oh, what about all the bodies with decapitated heads? Oh my God, the drugs, the violence. Does that go on? Yeah, it does in the border towns, just like violence goes on in the Bronx in New York City, not to pick on the Bronx, or 2nd Street, Strasbourg, if you like. Is that the real Mexico? Well, that's up to you to judge if you go down there and check it out for yourself. In my view, no, it's not. My kids, in my opinion, are safer in Mazatlan, Mexico than they are right here in East Stroudsburg. So I think there's a misrepresentation of Mexico that gets portrayed in the media, gets portrayed every time there's another announcement of a drug cartel act of violence that goes on. So that's a big criticism of globalization, that even though we have some connection to other countries, sometimes we think very poorly of them. Sometimes they're not represented at all, and it's all because of the way that the information is circulating around the world. Which takes us now to our third and final criticism of globalization. That is the criticism of cultural imperialism. Cultural imperialism. Have you ever found yourself saying, why is everybody speaking Spanish? And I'm just at the grocery store trying to purchase something, and, this bothers me. Or have you ever found yourself going through a big city and suddenly you're in Chinatown and you can't find a cheeseburger, and you're like, I don't want this kind of food? Well, if you have been, you're not necessarily unusual. You may be suffering from an unease about cultural imperialism. Because what cultural imperialism is a kind of an invasion of a foreign culture into your own culture, but in the context of this class, it's coming through media. So, for example, let's look at the reverse of that, not here in the United States. Let's take the example of France. France has a rich tradition in the way that they prepare food and the way that they eat food. French food is some of the best in the world. And when you eat French food, you eat it in courses. You eat an appetizer, then an entree, and then you have a dessert, which is not always sweet stuff. It could be fruit. And then after that, sometimes you have what's called a digestive, a kind of a shot of alcohol that's meant to churn that food and break it up so that you digest it. And this could take place over 2 hours. And when you sit down, the waiter doesn't come over to your table right away because he or she wants you to get settled and have a good night out and enjoy the other person's company. That's why you're there. Okay, it's a very different style of eating than the American model, which is get them in, get them out. The American doesn't have a lot of time, needs to get out of there, and the waitress needs to, or the waiter needs to turn that table over so that they can maximize the tips, and the restaurant wants to turn the tables over. It's a very different way of eating. So when you have a lot of TV shows, let's just pick a rerun like Friends. You remember the comedy that's on Netflix now, Friends? Or something more modern like Third Rock from the Sun or The Daily Show, which is not a sitcom, but it's still a comedy. And in those comedies, you have the American dining experience exposed. And so you have people sitting at tables eating in the way that they're eating and the things that they're eating. And then that's followed by commercials for McDonald's and Burger King and a kind of fast food style eating. Then what you have when those things are being broadcast to other countries is young people growing up and they're starting to adopt those behaviors. They're starting to say to themselves, you know, I want to do what I saw on TV, even though it may not be conscious. And now you have the French traditions going away. And now people are looking for McDonald's. Now people are not eating the cordon bleu. Now people are looking for the waiter quicker and saying service sucks so they don't come. That's cultural imperialism. It's a way of life that's invading your way of life, and it's coming in through the media. So this then sets up our chapter on globalization. It's the context in which all of the media systems in all of the countries as well as the rest of the world are operating, and it's going to give us the end of our video lecture today. Have a great day.